Quick greetings. Quick is Algonquin for hello. Thank you for joining me for another video. Um, Tonight's video, we just are going to attempt to read the entire article that we have often referred to uh, on American Indian sovereignty by the Constitution. Oh boy, we'll see the name of it. But they are an organization that basically uh, they have they basically teach Constitution slash discuss the Constitution and what it meant. At least that's what this issue of the periodical that we're going to look at is doing. It's telling us what American Indian sovereignty is, and it goes into 6 pages of the whole thing. So before we get to that, I want to look at something really quick. So let me share my screen. Okay. So I was interested in what I could find about colored persons. Okay. And so this seemed to be uh, more of a legitimate find. And as you can see, it's from up here, Encyclopedia. Okay. Up here, Encyclopedia Virginia.org. Primary documents, you see? So, uh, yeah, if you want to find this, that's where it is. I'll try to link it if I remember. So, colored persons and Indians defined. Again, this is a primary document. And we're going to read this. It's really quick. And then we're going to just see if we can pick up anything from this. Okay. Okay. Context. In colored persons and Indians defined from the Code of Virginia. So this is from the Virginia or the corporations, one of their codes, right? From 1930. The General Assembly provides legal definitions of colored persons and Indians. This was one of three so-called racial integrity laws passed between 1924 and 1930 in Virginia. Okay, so we must remember Virginia is an Algonquin uh, birthright land. Okay, so who is being affected first by this corporation's views on what an Indian is? That would be the Algonquin Indians. And we should know by now what Algonquins look like because we talked about what Giovanni Verrazano found in North Carolina, which is the next step under Virginia. Okay, so they were dark, and they looked like Ethiopians, right? That's what Verrazano said. So in that description, no one should ever get a visual of a Mongolian because there's no Mongolians in Africa, right? Okay, so if Giovanni Verrazano is trying to tell you what American Indians look like, and the first thing he does is go to a country in Africa, we should know that these people are not Asians, right? Okay, the next thing we should know is that this is not Africa, and it certainly is not Ethiopia. So when he goes to describe the very first Indians that he saw here as looking Ethiopian, dark with short hair, we must conclude that, man, those Indians sure sound like they must be so-called Negro, right? Okay, so let's keep it moving here. So this is actually from the racial integrity laws, right? From 1930, the Code of Virginia. Okay, the full text we're reading. Section 67. Colored persons and Indians defined. Every person in whom there is ascertainable any Negro blood should be deemed and taken to be a colored person. Okay. And every person not a colored person having 1/4 or more of American Indian blood should be deemed an American Indian, except that members of Indian tribes living on reservations allotted them by the Commonwealth of Virginia, having 1/4 or more of Indian blood and less than 1/16 of Negro blood, shall be deemed tribal Indians, so long as they are domiciled on said reservation. Okay, Code 1887. So they're basically saying that if you're not in a tribe and you look like a Negro, you're going to be called colored. But what I'm getting from this as well is that you can be Caucasian and be called an Indian if you're on an Indian tribe. Now, if you're not in an Indian tribe, I guess you're going to be white. But let's read it one more time. Um, Colored persons and Indians define. Every person in whom there is ascertainable any Negro blood shall be deemed and taken to be a colored person. And every person not a colored person having 1/4 or more of American Indian blood shall be deemed an American Indian. So 1/4 or more. So 1/4. That sounds like one of your grandparents is Indian, maybe. Is that what it is? But you don't look like a Negro, right? That's basically, they're trying to get a phenotype going on of what an American Indian should look like. And they're basically saying that there should be no dark American Indians, basically, right? That's what I'm getting from this. If you can be called black, even if you are an Indian, you're going to be called colored, is what I'm getting from this. Because how do they measure blood? You know? And did they have a bloodometer to take blood samples? No, right? They looked at you and what they're basically saying when they say ascertainable, if there's any ascertainable Negro blood. So they're going to look at your hair, probably, what kind of hair you got, because that's what they're going to call Negro, right? And I believe they're going to look at your skin. But I think one of the major phenotype markers is your hair. I do believe, as I'm reading this, that's what I'm getting. But one way or another, when they look at you, they're going to make you color, whether you're an Indian or not. Okay. But it is quite contraire that there seem to be saying that if you there I'm getting that you can be a Caucasian because that they're not saying anything about that, but they're making sure that if you're a Negro looking, you're going to be called color. But they're not specifying that, you know, if you're European looking, they're not talking about that, right? They want to make sure that Negroes are not confused with Indians. And how they're going to make a distinction is it's just the way you look. Okay. So we go further down. As the section read in the Code of 1887, persons having one-fourth or more Negro blood were deemed colored under the Code of 1924. Every person having 1/16th or more of Negro blood was deemed colored. The amendment of 1930 also added the last provision. Okay. So this is 1930, but they're going by a code in 1887. I guess it was an amendment. Let's see. As the section read in the code of 1887, persons having one-fourth or more Negro blood were deemed colored, while under the code of 1924, any person having 1/16th. Okay, so they in other it's like you could have the most minute bit of Negro blood and they still going to call you color. At one point in 1887, it was one-fourth or more Negro blood. But then they squeeze, in other words, they're making you least and least likely to be called Indian. Because even if you have 1/16th, you're colored. Okay? Well, here they're talking about in McPherson versus Commonwealth, blah, 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 28, blah, blah, blah. It was held that a woman whose father was white and whose mother's father was white and whose great grandmother was of brown complexion was not a Negro in the sense of this section as it was in 1877. But again, the amendment in 1930, she might be called colored now because they want to make sure basically that no Negro is going to be called an Indian. Okay. So cited in Moon versus Children's Home Society, blah, 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 as to teaching mixed schools. Okay. What did you, as a listener, discerning, notice about that? This is a code. This is in their system, right? This is a law that's in colonizers' statutes, codes, regulations, blah, 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 right? It's got doctrine of discovery written all over it, but that's besides the point. But what did you notice about the very first state to have slaves, or what they're calling slaves, or which more likely indentures? What is conspicuously missing from the narrative that we're given about slaves? let's see if we could do a word search. We don't have to, but we're going to be very what do you call it? Expedient? Is that what expeditious or whatever? And I already had it typed in there. Okay. AFRIC. We don't even have to type the rest of it. If this was the first state to deal with an influx of quote unquote African slaves, how could they not designate these people as African? Because that's definitely who they would eventually be. These colored people would eventually become African, right? But this is just a little proof to people of basic intelligence to be able to discern. They're not talking about Africans, y'all. I would think that in a statute, they would make sure they designate these people, these quote unquote slaves, as African because you want to make sure that is what follows. We started out Negro and colored, y'all, just like during the paper genocide that happened like a century before this, right? It was in the 1790s, the first federal census where Indians were being called colored. So all you got to do is look at this and say, well, colored persons are Indians. So when you say colored persons and Indians define, you're building on a foundation that already laid the groundwork to make Indians be called colored in your first federal census. I hope we don't have to pull up the article on the paper genocide. I hope you will recall that it was Indians, full blood American Indians, who were being called colored. That was the genocide. This beast comes to the land, and suddenly it doesn't want there to be such things as American Indians, so it creates Native Americans. But then they get slick and they kind of interchange those terms. You'll start off reading, say, a paragraph about Native Americans. Somewhere in that paragraph, they're going to stick in American Indian, just just for confusion's sake. This system really needs to learn to be more consistent, especially when you're talking legalese or terms that would be found in legalese. You cannot do the replacement name game. Let a Native American always be a Native American each and every time you talk about Native Americans, okay? Because obviously one has legislation and the other does not. Native Americans, well, they're not, let's just say they're not in the Constitution. Because by the time they start getting jiggy with these statutes and codes, you just might find Native Americans in some of these statutes. Yeah. But again, let's stick with the Constitution. Let's stick with that Constitution. So the big shock here is that in a Virginia code, they could not call us African. They couldn't do it, y'all. Nowhere in this code are we called African. And this is the definition of what a colored person is. Nowadays, colored is synonymous with African. Back then, it was not. They're very slick, very slick. So over time, they're depending on semantics rather than the law. They literally depend on semantics and perception, smoke and mirrors that allows them to not have to pay attention to their own laws, right? Once they get the public to just think that a colored is the same thing as an African American, and all they do is sit back and let the genocide games begin, right? Well, that was our big, you know, reveal, shall we say. In a Virginia law defining color, there is not one mention of an African American. How telling that is. Okay, so again, I will try to link this for anyone who wants to just look it over again. And so now we must begin the daunting task of reading Civil Rights, I'm sorry, Constitutional Rights Foundation. I'm sorry, that's what it was. Constitutional Rights Foundation. So I had a version of this article where all the points I wanted to look at were highlighted, and somehow I lost it. So I think we're going to have to go for the gusto here and read the whole thing. But what we're going to particularly look out for is how we talk about sovereignty, right? American Indian sovereignty. But when you read how Congress acted on so many occasions, Indians were not consulted. When they decided to not do treaties anymore, Indians were not consulted. Now, mind you, the treaties were bogus because with the doctrine of discovery, you didn't need treaties. Those were just for show. It's so the government could say that they had them. It wasn't anything to do with respecting American Indians. It's to cover the United States corporation's ass, okay? So they can always say, look, we were fair with these Indians, weren't we? No, you weren't. You just did that to make it look good. What you were really riding like a heifer in heat was the doctrine of discovery. Okay? That's what you were riding on. So let's see how much they rode that. Okay, so again, this article, we're gonna get into it because enough of the, surface stuff. Let's see just how they disenfranchises even Indians that they call sovereign, right? Because it's not sovereign. They're redefining the word sovereign. This corporation gets to do a lot, yo. Some bold-faced moves, however ridiculous. You don't get to redefine words, yo. You just shooting yourself in the foot. You just tag a word on, you think that makes you look good because you use that word. We're gonna show you what that word really means, okay? Okay. The Bill of Rights in Action. This is by the Constitutional Rights Foundation, winter of 2021. American Indian Sovereignty. So let's tackle this thing. Okay. So we're not going to read about that picture because that picture is not a picture of copper colored, dark Ethiopian looking Indians, right? These are Mongolian Indians. Verrazano said he found dark complexion, short hair. Look how long the hair is in these pictures. Ethiopian looking. Do these look like folks from Ethiopia? Where would you say they were from? Okay, so these are not the original Indians. I don't care how pitiful they look, because this looks like the sorriest bunch I've ever seen, except maybe this guy here. He got somewhat, I don't know. Them other ones, it's like, damn, lying is nasty work. Lying on your ancestors. You are lying on your ancestors. But you gotta have gotten something out the deal. I don't know what it is, but maybe just I can't even say. This is amazing how even the fakians get treated like shit. Okay, so let's move on. Sovereignty is a political term that refers to the supreme power of a self-governing nation over its land and people. Do Indians have that? Hell no. Just like Miss Sophie said. Hell no. Over time, the U.S. Congress and the Supreme Court, those are your two bosses, Indians who wish to be federal and be in corporation, 501c3. Them's your bosses right there. Them's your chief, okay? I guess one is the mother and the other the father chief, something. Over time, the U.S. Congress and the Supreme Court sharply weakened. Can we hit that one more time? Sharply what? Weakened American Indian sovereignty. But a recent Supreme Court decision may begin to turn the tide. Well, you see, nothing in the Supreme Court should be doing anything for sovereign Indians, Joe. Just like nothing in the Supreme Court would do anything for a sovereign in Russia, right? Or a sovereign, like we always say, China. So the Supreme Court can't give us sovereignty. That's the problem here. It thinks it can. This is something our ancestors gave us, and it is God given, not Supreme Court given. So no, if they make a recent decision, all they got to do is make another decision, right? More recent decision. And who knows how they're going to feel on that day, right? With the phases of the moon, right? So that's why we don't need the Supreme Court. They don't have our best interests. We're not represented in the damn Supreme Court. Ain't not near one judge on that seat representing an American Indian not taxed. Okay? So no, thank you. So let's read it one more time. Sovereignty is a political term that refers to the supreme power of a self-governing nation over its land. That's the last thing any Indian has in this country, even the fake Indians. And people. Over time, the U.S. Congress and the Supreme Court sharply weakened American Indians. They still doing it, yo. So this is the problem. They can weaken it, they can strengthen it. If you're in their jurisdiction, it can go either way. That's why you don't want to be under their jurisdiction. One day they feel like giving you something, next day they say, I take it back. What the hell you doing having any say in what we get? This is our land. We're the ones that tell you what you can have and not have. The National Museum of the American Indian indicates that American Indian, Native American, and Native are all acceptable terms for indigenous people in the U.S., though use of a specific tribal name is preferred. Well, we have a problem. They shouldn't all be acceptable. What's in the Constitution? Constitutional Rights Foundation? Why would you, of all entities, think that it's just okay to call American Indian, Indian, Native American? No, they're not the same. So, yeah, this is the kind of thing we're going to have to grit and bear reading for the National Museum of the American Indian indicates that American Indian, Indian, Native American, and Native are acceptable terms for indigenous people in the U.S. So let's rewind. No, I can't even say that though, because American Indian and definitely Indian should not be interchangeable with Native American. Why? Let's say it again. This thing is in the Constitution, and this thing is not. They are not the same. They don't have the same level. Uh, well, Native American doesn't have anything. Indians have sovereignty. Native Americans are created entities. Now, I did think a little more about this. Why are they using the term Indian on Americans? Well, it's a colonizer doing that, right? So they have to be consistent with what Columbus said. Now, if Columbus didn't call us Indian, they wouldn't call us. But they figure we're not going to call the people by what they want to call themselves. We're going to call them what our other colonizer did, uh, Columbus, when he went to the Caribbean. Because as we always say, Columbus never came to North America. So the first people to be called Indian were West Indian. And then the name or the misnomer was applied to North America. So that's why it landed in the Constitution, because I believe they had to be consistent. They couldn't deny what they had been calling us all along. But the whole point is it's what they are calling. So that gives them what? Some kind of creation rights over us. So Indian is a tricky word that we shouldn't get too comfortable with. We only use it now because it's the only thing in this system that is actually referring to us. Again, we have Verrazano describing that we look dark like Ethiopians. So that's what he saw an Indian to be. That was us. But once we step into our sovereign capacity, we want to let them know that we're going to get rid of all colonizer terms used on us. We're going to be the American that you redefine in your 1828 Webster's dictionary. That's the term that went to Europeans. That is the term that needs to be taken back so that Europeans can become European again, make Europeans European again. Okay? Make so-called American Indians again, or Americans again. So, uh, I do agree, use of a specific tribal name is preferred. Yeah. And that leads me to another conversation. It's just that same conversation. You're being sort of there's too much lumping going on with this entity known as India. There's too much lumping. Like, for instance, no American Indian should want to take on anything Iroquois if you're not Iroquois, because you want they did specific things that you may not want to be party to, so we have to stop taking accolades or whatever you want to call them that one specific tribe of Indians have as if it's all Indians. That's why I do agree with this. We have to go back to whatever our linguistic was or whatever our tribe was. But to do this thing, to say that we designed this government when there is only one specific Indians that are even associated as having anything to do with this government, that's the Iroquois. If you're not an Iroquois Indian, you shouldn't be taking credit for this government. And I know the idea is, well, if we lump together, we'll be a bigger force. No, we won't. We'll be bigger, but it'll be weaker. Because, again, you're taking on the accolades of a small group of Indians that, for the most part, went against the larger group of Indians. So the dynamic here is you're siding or taking the accolades of a small group of Indians. So that means you're up against a larger group of Indians who did not agree with what the Iroquois did. So I just think that's an important thing. If it's all about, as I've heard it said, reconnecting to your original tribe, then we got to start finding out what our specific tribes were about and stop taking accolades that are only for one group of Indians that may not have had the larger group of Indians' best interests. The larger group of Indians were Algonquin, probably the largest. And the Iroquois Confederacy was so small that they had to take Indians that didn't even speak their language to be part of their confederacy. Okay. And again, this is not about, oh, we're going to just hate on Iroquois. It's about knowing your lane. It's about knowing the role that certain Indians played and stop giving them this carte blanche. Oh, you just like every other. No, you're not. Not if you were so civilized to the point where you would turn on other Indians that you, as well as the colonizer, deemed uncivilized. That wasn't your call. A group of Indians can do what the hell they want, right? But what they can't do is assume that what's right for them is right for every other Indian. And that's why I feel that justice would be so absurd if Iroquois were forced to live under their own laws or their own the world that they created with colonizer for all Indians. If they were the only ones who had to live by that, that would be divine justice, meaning only the United States only applies to you. You in the United States, they only govern you. Their laws and rules and statutes and codes and all that only applies to you. You being dominated by the federal system only applies to you, as well as the 5 civilized tribes. But for their agenda to be seen that that's what has to be placed on all Indians, no. That day is over. You don't want to live in subjugation? That is your choice. It is not the choice of every Indian on this landmass. And it wouldn't be. I know it wouldn't be for any Algonquin who knows better. Lenni Lenape are compromised. They're Moorish compromised, just like the Iroquois. And that's just the end of the story. Again, this is not to bash them. This is not to call some kind of uh, attack on them. It's just knowing the lane that they're in and knowing that that is not my lane. Although you guys claim to be Algonquian, you lost that. You're a compromised Algonquin set of it. Yeah. And again, how I know this is by their creation story, which has a turtle, where Algonquin's creation story did not have a turtle. So they're already, allowing an Iroquois uh, uh, tenant to slip into their Algonquin. So if it was duress, that's different. But at this point, somebody needs to wake up. And if you want to stay under that BS, then you are a minority when it comes to the greater family of Algonquian Indians. You would be in the minority because you are basically going in under an Iroquois domination, and you accept it. It seems to me that it's accepted, and you are also Moorish in infiltrated. So, okay. Meaning they have married into the Moor so much that the Moor is directing their every path and they're just going along with it because that's all they know. Once the Moor marries into your family, it's all about his world, not yours. Because remember, you're the ones that were heathen, whereas the Moor has always been, at his inception, considered non-heathen because they are of basically the Abrahamic faith. They are not like American Indians. And that is a big fundamental difference between Moors and Americans. We are notoriously known, or it is notoriously known, that we were not Christian. The Moors come, you become Christian, you never get your land back, and the Moors sitting there grinning in your face. So, what's going on? You here converting me in every kind of way I can be converted, but ain't nobody talking about giving me my land back because you're being genocided by Moors right in your face. Okay. So, as historian Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz wrote in An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States, I use indigenous, Indian, and native interchangeably. Yeah, because you're not very smart, apparently. Indigenous individuals and peoples in North America, on the whole, do not consider Indian a slur. It's in the Constitution, for crying out loud. All the other ones should be more like slurs because they're not referencing anything in law, really. This article follows the same guidelines on terminology. I have to say I have a problem with that part of the article. That's why I never really read it. But there's other parts that we need to look at. So I am a little shocked that a foundation for constitutional rights do not see the unconstitutionality of using the word Native American. But then again, I have to say, because the Constitution did adopt the 14th Amendment, and with that came all these other misnomers, I guess, and federal Indian law, because, once they started making laws for their civilized Indians, I guess this allows them to introduce Native Americans, right? And think that they're the same as American Indians, right? They're not, but we know that, right? Um, we have to go down. Okay. The founding fathers said little in the Constitution about the American Indian peoples, aka nations or tribes, that lived around them. We lived all around, right? We were not in any reservations. There was just too many of us. That's why they had to reclassify us. They stuck the Native Americans on reservations, but us, they just said, look, there's too many of these Negroes. We just have to go in black, uh, and they can't be Indians no more. That's the only way to get rid of these folks. And little by little, we'll just terrorize them. Hopefully, they'll just wipe them off the face of the earth. Never going to happen. Never going to happen. Why? Because they're working with wickedness. They're just working wickedness, and they're in their own terms. Okay. No, I'm not a Christian. I'm just saying, in their own terms, it's working wickedness, trying to get rid of innocent people. Why? So you can steal their stuff? That's wickedness. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Representation in the House of Representatives was based on counting all free persons, 3/5 of indentures, but excluding Indians not taxed. Thus, American Indians were not considered citizens of the United States. Okay? Now that's what we always do. Because we want to make sure we have a standing. And when you read this, this is partly why the Commerce Clause doesn't make sense. It really doesn't, because you're taking all this beautiful sovereignty here and you're just throwing it under the bus with commerce. Because if you're sovereign and you don't got no land, maybe you're not sovereign. You're not, because you're on somebody else's land. That's the way they're going to look at it. And that's exactly how the United States looks at it. They don't see it as your land. They say you're just occupying it. We read somewhere, right? So they feel you on their land now. That's how mentally ill this system is. It forgets that it came here because some deity they believe in allegedly told them that they can do whatever they want with people that don't believe in that day. And so now they think that this is their land, for real, for real. Delusional. Where did you come from? That's your land. That's your land. You want something here? Like everybody else, you're going to have to pay. You can't just steal forever. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Only Congress had the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. The tribes were therefore something different from foreign nations and the states. Yeah, well, why are they being mentioned with foreign nations and states if they're so different? Because this is just Looney Tunes. This is all a doctrine of discovery causing all this confusion. This is what it is. So once again, they say that we're sovereign, and then their big vindicator to enslave us is the Commerce Clause. They love that Commerce Clause, y'all, because again, with, didn't we say something about the word with? Let's read this again. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Only Congress had the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among several states and with the Indian tribe. So again, it sounds a little better if you read it as it is written, that, oh, they're supposed to regulate commerce with the Indians. But when you really think about it, sovereigns don't regulate their commerce with foreign. They do that all by themselves. So even if they were to go by this, there's still something innately wrong with this picture. Congress keeps inserting itself based on what? The doctrine of discovery, which has been what? Repudiated. Will someone please send Congress a telegram of this occurrence? Oh, okay. Um, I don't want to say what I've been feeling lately about this map, but all I can say is looking at this map, you think Algonquins were really northern because somehow this map makes the South look very northern. I can't explain it. But one thing I must say is that if this is the area of the civilized tribe, right? And we got to remember the Beaver Wars, it was the Algonquins who lost against Iroquois and the British. So wouldn't the loser have to give up this land if it was theirs? Because I believe that's exactly what happened. I believe that's exactly what happened. Iroquois was small compared to Algonquin, but looking at this map, it's like, it's sort of somehow you wouldn't get the idea that the Algonquins were one of the largest groups. Uh, so again, Iroquois down here, they're surrounding themselves with Muskogeans, so it makes them look bigger, right? But again, Iroquois, that language, and Muskogee language, that is, they are younger languages than Algonquin. So that means before this red area was here, all this was pink. This is the oldest language. The pink is Algonquin. So before the purple, before the red, there were Algonquin speaking, not Muskogee, not Iroquois. And down here, this language was not here in Florida. Timucuan, I believe, or Siouan. Is that what it is? I'm not going to blow it up right now. But anyway, we have to just remind ourselves that the loser Indians were the Algonquin. And those who group themselves with Iroquois would be considered the winner. That would be Creek, Cherokee, which is Iroquois, Chickasaw, right? Seminole, and Choctaw. So they're all in alliance with the Cherokee, who are Iroquois. So they would be the ones to inherit what was once Algonquin as the quote unquote victors with a little help from Cotton. The French helped us like a hole in the head. What I read is that the French, again, I said this before, they limited the weaponry they would give to Algonquins. Now, Britain was overloading the Iroquois with weaponry, yo. They here, take it, here. The French were like, well, do you believe in Jesus? And the Algonquins were, yeah, well, I'm an Indian. Well, I can't give you the weapons yet. You got to believe in Jesus first. So the French were not the best allies. I think it was all a coup. I think the French may as well have been fighting on the side of the Iroquois and the British against the Algonquin. You got to remember, it's the biggest linguistic that they have to take down. If they find an ally in your enemy, well, then that's how they can take the big dog down. Algonquins were the oldest linguistic in this whole entire area, and it stretched over to over here, okay? See this other pink area? That's also Algonquin. You don't see this kind of proliferation with Iroquois. Iroquois are smack dab in Algonquin territory down here, and they sort of was a small group over here, and now the five boroughs you can see are Algonquin, right? But it's considered Iroquois because they have New York bleeding into the city. New York City is squarely in Algonquin land, right? Right. So that's what the victor got. They got to be the voice of all Indians and pretend that Algonquins never exist. This is why we need to not try to act like this rift is just no, never mind. Unfortunately, you have to make moves based on the real history, not the fantasy that all Indians were singing Kumbaya around the campfire. See, that just wasn't the case. So Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, this provision gave the president the power to make treaties with the advice and consent of the Senate. This implied treaties with the Indians, or would imply treaties with the Indians. Everything they're doing with the Indians is based on the doctrine of discovery and nothing else. Because what happens is they go with whichever one allows them to disenfranchise Indians more, and that would be the doctrine of discovery. So even if they did throw you a bone like civil rights, they don't even have to go by that. That's just a bone, y'all. Civil rights ain't crap. But I'm just saying, when you wonder, why am I still chasing civil rights when that was made specifically for me, allegedly, because they keep calling me an African slave? That was for me, right? Civil rights? No. Now you got everybody talking about their civil rights were violated. Civil rights, the world is being made aware now for the very first time. That was for the children of slaves. Well, it shouldn't have been when it comes to Indians, because Indians were not slaves. Read Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, and tell me what an Indian is supposed to be. Sovereign? Oh, okay. So that means what? We had a standing, right? Okay. So when you say that we're slaves, you mean indentures, right? Right. And then because you keep calling us African, you're trying to say that the only thing available to us was civil rights. That would be incorrect. Namely, because we're not African. So so what they're doing here is they're trying to make something that doesn't apply to Indians apply to Indians, right? Indians are mentioned twice. One as Indian, not tax, and the other as tribes dominated in commerce. I don't really count the 14th Amendment because that was something added. It wasn't in the original Constitution, there was no 14th Amendment. So I never really count that third mention of Indians because it's just a repeat of the Indians not tax clause. And it shouldn't even be there because the 14th Amendment is a conversation about citizenship. And Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, Indians are not citizens. So why are you mentioning us in a discussion of 14th Amendment citizens? It's because they want to confuse the issue and make it seem like somehow that had something to do with us. But now, again, for the first time in American history, they're telling us that, oh no, the 14th Amendment is for slaves. Who are you telling? Because you're the only one who made it something that it wasn't. It wasn't the people. People don't even understand this confused and contrary system. So who are you telling that it was meant for us descendants of slaves? I hope you're looking in the mirror when you say that, because it is only you that tried to make it other than for slaves. You, Congress. Yeah, you. At the time of the writing of the Constitution in 1787, most of the Native American tribes were sovereign nations. They were at the peak of their power, governed themselves, and occupied lands without interference from European settlers. But their sovereign status would soon change dramatically. So I I'm always trying it, and I don't know if it reaches. But my argument is Indians didn't have states, so they didn't have a government like the one we have because we didn't have states. As well, it was only the Iroquois that are said to have something sort of, kind of like a democracy, I guess they want to call it. So again, what do we have? Indians taking the credit for one group of Indians. You know, only the Iroquois Confederacy are named as having something similar, not the same, but something similar to the United States government. But Indians, again, we become one sort of a nebulous amoeba where we just mix everything into one, uh, you know, Indian thing. But it's just not the case. We can't take the accolades of what Iroquois did and say that's what all Indians did. It's such a slap in the face to specific ancestors. We can't just say what Iroquois did is what all Indians did. There were winners and losers in the Beaver Wars. So to take the side of the victor means that you're siding with the colonizer in disenfranchising Indians that should not have been disenfranchised to the degree that they are disenfranchised. And that's the Algonquin. It is Algonquins that lost. It is Algonquins that were made indentures, if this is to make any sense. The winner of the war is not going to be made indenture. I just don't see the logic in that. But you'll always have someone that will pull a rabbit out of a hat, I mean, you're not civilized tribes for no reason. There's no way you're going to be considered a loser in a war between uncivilized Indians and civilized Indians. Now, the colonizer treating you like anime, that's different. He's going to always treat you like anime, but that's what you want. And unlike the real anime, you are choosing to stay in that relationship and you promote colonizer tactics, even though he still treats you like you're a heathen. But then again, I can't say that because the real civilized tribes went underground, like Judge Brown. So they probably have, you know, good positions in the system like Judge Brown did. You know, it's just something where just psyop on top of psyop on top of psyop on top of psyop, right? Okay, so we learned that we were sovereign and occupied lands without interference from European settlers, but their sovereign status would soon change dramatically. Let's start off with the removal of Indian tribes. In 1787, Congress enacted the Northwest Ordinance to govern the territory north of the Ohio River. This law recognized that Indian land and property shall never be taken from them without their consent. Well, the first problem with this is that it's Congress enacted. Now, we're going to hear people that say this Northwest Ordinance was something honorable or something good or something, wonderful, whatever. The fact that it's Congress created means it's like cotton candy. It tastes good when you first come in contact with it, but really it's going to disappear and probably make you sick or be bad for your health. So, in 1787, Congress enacted the Northwest Ordinance to govern territory north of the Ohio River. Congress enacted. Indians, that means Indians had nothing to do. When I say Indians are not represented in Congress, we're looking at Congress enacting something that Indians had no say in. Now, yes, granted, again, we have to keep reminding ourselves these are civilized, right? But somehow this is what they agreed to, being dominated. Maybe they feel like something, Christ is a suffering Christ and they're civilized and they believe in him, so they got to suffer like him, right? Maybe that's what they're into, I don't know. I don't know. Uh, but again, those are Mongolians. You see how the psyop, it just, even when you're aware of it, it sort of still colors our thoughts. Okay. I'm sorry, we're going to read it again. In 1787, Congress enacted the Northwest Ordinance to govern territory north of the Ohio River. So they're going to govern the territory, not Indians, right? They are electing themselves to govern uh, that territory. This law recognized that Indian land and property shall never be taken from them without their consent. That is a laugh because by 1787, that had already happened. You know? So it'll never be taken from them except for before we enacted this law, and we're going to keep that thing that we took. Not really, because by the 1800s, we got the John Marshall Law where Indians lost land, right, to the state of Georgia, right, the Cherokee Nation. And that was without their consent. They didn't want that. They went to Supreme Court, and John Marshall said, why don't you just give up that land? Stop being so damn selfish. So they couldn't even argue the Northwest Ordinance, apparently, because the judge said, no, I'm going to give you land somewhere else. You're not supposed to do that with alleged indigenous people. But again, these tribes are not really indigenous. They're Mongolians. All they can do is say, I got to correct myself. They can only say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. I don't even, they can't even say no. Like I said in my last video, I was incorrect. Yes, sir, yes, ma'am. That's what they have to say. They have everything colonizer want. You gotta do it. You can't say no. What the hell was I thinking? That's the real Indian in me, right? Who's saying hell no, right? To everything, right? Few years later, President George Washington was personally involved in securing one of the new country's first treaties with American Indian people. The Creeks gave up some of their land in Georgia to the U.S. in exchange for a trade deal and farming tools. You see how they was working it? So you have a government, right? That their eye is on the prize. They got some farm tools. Instead of them saying, well, no, that's your land. We don't want to take it from you. You could give us something else for the farm tools. They are in it to win it. Now, if they cared about even the Fakians, they'd be like, no, that's your land. It's your tribe. Damn it, we gave you a damn reservation. How can we take it back? That don't make sense. Nope. What did this greedy MFers do? Okay, we'll take your land for some farming tools. Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Okay. So this is the problem in general, ladies and gentlemen. You have a government that's all too willing. They're infatuated with taking land from Americans, even the Fakians. They do not put a muzzle on their grill when it comes to devouring our land. They'll talk about a Northwest ordinance, and then they turn around a few years later. President George Washington was personally involved in securing one of the new country's first treaties with American Indian people, the Treaty of New York in 1790. As part of this treaty, the Creeks gave up some of their land. Why do it have to involve giving up land? Why can't that not be part of the treaty? Because you're dealing with some greedy, greasy MFers, okay? They shouldn't want your land. They shouldn't even want your land. If they were on the up and up, they shouldn't even bother with your land. But this just shows us that they cannot help themselves. They take. How is it an equal trade to give up land for some farm? It don't even seem like, no, it's not. But again, we have to keep reminding ourselves these Creeks can only say yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Real Indians, they're being called black at this point, and that's the end of that. The treaty also called for the United States to protect the Creeks from outside threats. I guess that's from the uncivilized Indians. I do have a feeling that these civilized Indians had to be on the lookout for uncivilized Indians to some degree because they were so in colonizers' ass that they were like colonizers. They were like colonizers' colon. So a treaty for protection. It's just this whole thing is just weird. How does your colonizer protect you when he's the only one that's really messing you over? But I keep forgetting these are compromised Indians. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. This provision, common in treaties with other tribes, made the Creeks somewhat dependent on the U.S. treaties, like this one. Okay, sorry, that was a sentence, two sentences. This provision, common in treaties with other tribes, made the Creeks somewhat dependent on the U.S. Well, the U.S. is dependent on them to take their lands, right? They're dependent on them to give up that land, but they don't see it that way. The U.S. always sees that you're benefiting from us. We just it's not the other way around. Well, it's true because when they had the doctrine of discovery on their side, they do whatever the hell they want, right? They could take whatever they want. So it's just all of this is just so weird when you look at it in light of the doctrine of discovery. This all seems like theater. It's making nice, but then they think it's like they turn away and then they come back with a vengeance because they know they didn't have to be nice, right? That was just to, I don't know, just to, I don't know at this point because again, those Native Americans are not even really, so that it just throws a wrench in all of this. Just ugh. So the treaty also called for the United States to protect the Creeks from outside threats. This provision, common in treaties with other tribes, common in treaties with other tribes, made the Creeks somewhat dependent on the U.S. Treaties like this one were designed to secure peace, regulate trade, but they redefined regulating trade. What was the trade going on between the Creeks and the United States? Nothing. There was no trade. The United States dominated every inch of every reservation that it, quote unquote, gave to these Native Americans. So treaties like this one were designed to secure peace, regulate trade, and prohibit white settlers from invading native occupied land. Rock of BS. But as immigration to the U.S. from Europe surged, while settlers increasingly sought to acquire native territories, provoking often violent confrontation. Read that again. But as immigration to the U.S. from Europe surged, white settlers increasingly sought to acquire native territory, provoking often violent confrontation. Who owned the land were the American Indian people. I'm sorry, who owned the land where the American peoples lived? American Indian people lived. In an 1823 Supreme Court decision, Chief Justice John Marshall wrote that the Indians had the right to occupy the land, but they could not own it. Why? Because of the doctrine of discovery. It was their land. They didn't have to do treaties with us, Indians. It was a mock treaty. It was a mock action. Making nice because they knew they could take it. And it, just when they got you to trust them, I guess that's when they strike. Because it's like, yeah, we got you to trust us, but now we know we can take whatever we want. So that's how they quote unquote defeated Indians. It was a game of cat and mouse in a way, you know. It wasn't really, I don't think it wasn't might because they could have, again, with the doctrine of discovery, they could have used might on us, but they had to finesse it a little. They had to be a little patient. Lord knows they wanted that land so bad because they knew it was theirs. It's like you looking at something that somebody has, and you're just saying, damn, the fact that they have it just makes me want it even more. And it makes me angry. Why I gotta play nice? That's my land. It's what the colonizer said to himself, lying to himself. This liar deities. So, who owned the land where American Indian peoples lived? In an 1823 Supreme Court decision, Chief Justice John Marshall wrote that the Indians had the right to occupy the land, but they could not own it. Marshall also wrote that as successors to the British in North America, only the United States government or federal government had the right to acquire lands, Indian lands, by treaty or conquest. Well, what do you need a treaty for if you already established that we were only occupying the lands and didn't own it? See what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen? So this is the infamous John Marshall that we always talk about. And what we learned from John Marshall, the big key point here is that he depended on the doctrine of discovery. This is why I keep saying that this whole system, when it comes to Indians and when it comes to the whole system, is built on the doctrine of discovery. You would think that all we have to do is let them know that the doctrine of discovery has been repudiated. And that is all we have. Somebody has to have the brain in the house. They're going to want to ignore it. But John Marshall, this judge, he built his cases on the doctrine of discovery. He was able to disenfranchise the Fakians because of the doctrine of discovery and because they fake too. That's, I guess we do have to include that in here. He don't have to respect them because they're not real Indians, but he could do whatever he wants, is the point, right? And it's all stemming from the doctrine of discovery. So only the United States federal government had the right to acquire Indian lands by conquest. Let's just say what it is, because you don't need a treaty when you have the doctrine of discovery. Why are you lying to yourself? Because y'all are punk asses, right? You had to do treaties because you had to make it look good for the Indians because they would have whooped your ass if you didn't play nice, right? You had to, you know, put on a show. Um, so let us continue. Native people had a different view. Tecumseh, uh-oh, Tecumseh, a Shawnee leader in what is now Ohio and Indiana, that was those are Algonquins. Let me make sure. But yeah, those are Shawnee are should be Algonquins. Let me look. Uh, but linguistic are uh, yes, Shawnee Indians are Algonquin. Okay, so Native people had a different view. Tecumseh, a Shawnee leader in what is now Ohio and Indiana, that means Algonquian land, once stated that the land belongs to the first who sits down on his blanket or skins, which he has thrown upon the ground. Until he leaves it, no other has right. Until he leaves it, no other has right. Okay. So that's not the best way to take ownership of land, but okay. Let's read it one more time. Native people had a different view. Tecumseh, a Shawnee leader in what is now Ohio and Indiana, once stayed. So that's to give you an idea of how big Algonquin territory was that Ohio and Indiana was part of one Indian tribe. Okay. He once stated that the land belongs to the first who sits down on his blanket or skin, which he has thrown upon the ground. And till he leaves it, no other has right. Well, I can see colonizers say, well, if we make you leave, does that count? And he couldn't disagree with that because that's how he set it out. Again, that's not the best way to take ownership of land because if you say till he leaves it, he might find, colonizers a slick, slimy, grimy snake. All you're gonna do is say, okay, so all we gotta do is move you off this ground. Okay, that's what we'll do. And then it's ours. Okay. A few southeastern native nations, including the Creeks, is the civilized tribe. It's like magic that every time they mention specific Indians, it's usually always the civilized tribes. You know, um, now they'll mention the Shawnee guy because he says something kind of that plays into what they would like. So they're mentioning him because I think the rationale is just what I said. Okay, so we just got to move you and then we could take the land. Thank you, Tecumseh. So, but now let's get to the big dog. A few southeastern native nations, including Creeks, Chickasaws, Choctaws, Seminoles, and Cherokee. I remember Cherokee are Iroquois, and they just surrounded by this other groups of Indians. That was the tactic that I think Iroquois had. They would surround themselves with other linguistic groups because they were not big enough to come up against the Algonquins by themselves. So not only did they have these other linguistic Indians around them, that's because those other Indians spoke Muskogean. The Creeks, Chickasaws, Choctaws, and Seminoles were Muskogean. Cherokee are the Iroquois. Okay. Um, but anyway, they are the darling of colonizers. Colonizer is absolutely in love with five civilized tribes and the Iroquois Confederacy. Although he has a relationship with the Lenni Lenape, he don't really want to talk about Lenni Lenape because they're Algonquin. And even though they're compromised Algonquins, they still don't really get a whole lot of mention. Um, it's all about those who are, uh, you know, attach themselves to the Iroquois. They are the darling of this system. So, early on, they began to adopt white Americans' customs and social standards. Yeah, we know. We know. We Algonquin Indians know that. Thank you. They practically became you, if you ask me. And I think but I know that it was the Moors that softened them up for the Europeanization. It's the Moors that married it. Well, to be fair, the piece we read said that the Washita, which are all these Indians that we just read in the civilized tribes, the Washita Indians were basically guided by a group of ancient Egyptian priests. Now, I thought that was very interesting for the Washita member to tell us that because it ties into what my uh, take on it is that the priests that we kicked out, they came back and cavorted with the what became civilized tribes. And I think they're really just foreigners because they're so mixed in with colonizer that they may as well be colonizers. That's why they're so willing to come up against Algonquin Indians, but in a way where it is too, in other words, a real Indian would not agree to erase another group of Indians off the entire land that they were on. I just don't think what I'm talking is Indians when it comes to do I side with a foreigner or do I side with another Indian? So in other words, we as Indians might not get along, but once a colonizer is in the house, it should make the Indians at least have incentive to work together. But that's not what you see happening with the Iroquois. I read something that said they're not sure who had more to gain between Iroquois and colonizer. It's just, you can't be sure who had more to gain. So what he's saying is it could just have easily had been Iroquois that were uh, doing everything that the colonizers, because they were gaining. They had something, you know. Uh, but anyway, let's finish thing. They took up farming. So these are the Indians, the ones we just read, the Creeks, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Seminole, Cherokee. Uh, Early on began to adopt white Americans' customs and social standards. They took up farming, learned English, built schools, created privately owned businesses. And I see that they very much, that's what I'm seeing. Like everybody wants to make a business. And that's a very colonizer thing to do. Uh, yeah, because creating a business puts you right square in commerce that Congress is going to have quote unquote plenary authority over because it's commerce. So they feel they are controlling American Indians' resources. So once you create yourself as a corporation, you're using a vehicle that they created where they are dominating your commerce, not you. You just joined a vehicle you just got in a vehicle that colonizer created to help colonizer dominate you and your resources. That's what happens when you create a corporation. It's not going to make you wealthy. It will just give you perhaps a little more fiat dollars, but you won't have wealth because you won't have control of the land. That is what colonizer is keeping for himself while you play with his monopoly money, getting all happy, right? When money runs out, a wealthy man has his land to rely on. But when money runs out for colonized people, they don't have anything to rely on. They don't have anything. And they are utterly dependent on colonizers' monopoly. As you said before, those monopoly dollars serve to make colonizer more rich than it'll make you, who have, even if you have millions of those dollars, they are helping colonizer to be in a dominant position over you. Okay. So they created privately owned businesses and adopted more strict class divisions within their society. They're just becoming as ugly as colonizers. Come on, somebody just say it. A few among the elite even became slave owners. Hmm, hmm. Well, after they win the war, the Beaver Wars were won by the Iroquois over Algonquin. So this, I believe, is where we're going to get slavery, what they call in slavery, which is really indentions. So what is that? That is the Algonquins working on their land and getting into all kinds of little situations where they lose their land to civilized tribes. So all they got to do, all the tribes got to do is say, "Oh, you didn't pick enough cotton. Okay, so I'll take your farm because you owe me. So I'll just take your farm as payment." And so I believe this is what happened in actuality. It was an indenturehood that was doomed because once they made Algonquins as if they owed the civilized tribes, that was a way to take the farm that were owned by the civilized, I'm sorry, by the Algonquins, former, formerly. The whole point of the war was to take over land that another Indian had. Somebody has to really be able to see that. It wouldn't make a difference if the Iroquois already had that land and they won the war. Okay. Um, so when an Indian loses to another Indian who is backed by colonizer and the quote unquote victorious Indians are going to take that Indian's land. And who were the Indians that lost? It was the Algonquin Indian. But again, they did not fight fair. There were way more Algonquins than there were civilized tribes and Iroquois. So it doesn't even make sense that the Algonquins lost, but God only knows what they really did to these people. I have one of my consulting Indians talk to me about a genocide that took place. I can't imagine that the winners of the Beaver Wars would be genocided, but there were many Indians apparently in Georgia, I believe it was, that were it. Let's just say the pictures look like a massive Holocaust. A lot of bones piled up and all of that. Uh, Logic dictates that that would have had to have been Algonquin Indians. Okay. They lost. Okay. Algonquins lost during the Beaver Wars, which was wars that lasted from the 1600s to like the 17. I mean, a long time. Like you'll have to, I believe, like 16. Let let me see. Maybe I can look it up quick. But we do have to. I'm only on page 2 of 6 pages. Okay. Okay, let's just see how long did it be. How long did the last? Okay. 60 to 70 years from 1640 to 1701. So before they could set up the Constitution, they had to get rid of a lot of Algonquins, right? So from 1701, uh, that's way before, the Constitution, right? But it was the British here and it was the French here helping or being involved in these wars. AI overview says the Beaver Wars, also known as the Iroquois Wars, see, they don't want to say who they were fighting. Oh Lord, Iroquois lasted roughly 60 to 70 years, from around 1640 to 1701. While the fighting wasn't continuous, historians generally divide the conflict into distinct periods of intense battles and periods of relative calm. The wars concluded with the signing of the Treaty of Montreal in 1701. So they will say it was the French and Iroquois. See, they don't even. I see. This is part of what I'm talking about when they don't even mention Algonquin. So they're going to say it was the Iroquois and the French. But who were the French allied with? Algonquin. Some websites will say the word Algonquin when it comes to the war, and they say it was primarily Iroquois and Algonquin. Uh, what it was about roughly was the Iroquois wanted to take over the beaver trade from the Algonquins. So uh, it's interesting to say that the Beaver Wars, as I'm reading here, were French and Iroquois. But the French were the ones that were buying the beaver pelts. So why would the Iroquois fight the French when it was the French who wanted the beaver pelts? You see what I'm saying? So if you want to take over the beaver trade, the ones who were buying the most pelts were the French. Why would you want to fight the French when they're going to be your customers after you take over the beaver trade? You were fighting Algonquins. And the French, I guess what they stood to get was perhaps they get a better deal with Iroquois if they allowed the Iroquois to beat up the Algonquin, who the French were supposed to be allies with. But maybe, I don't know. I'm just trying to think it out logically because it really doesn't make sense to me unless uh, the French were not being the best allies that they could be. And I read that they weren't. So maybe they pretended to be helping Algonquins, but the truth is they were really, it was like the Algonquins fighting three different entities, okay? So of course they're going to lose, right? You're fighting British, you're fighting Iroquois, and you're fighting French who are acting like they're your allies when they are not really. So it's Algonquins against three. Now the Algonquins were large, but they were spread out too. So say one group of Algonquins in one part of the land fighting three different entities. Yes, I'm saying that they were fighting the French as well. I'm just because I don't see, again, if Iroquois wanted to dominate the fur trade, the biggest customers were French. So what I'm saying is, if the French said to the Iroquois, would you give us a better deal on the pelts? Wouldn't that automatically, wouldn't that be in the best interest of both of them, Iroquois and the French? Because the win for the Iroquois would be, we definitely want to kick some Algonquin ass in them. So once we kick their ass, they won't have any fur trade at all. We'll have it all. And we'll just say whatever we need to say for the French. But then when we're dominating the pelt trade, then we could do whatever the hell we want. But to get, you know, it just, yeah, just, you know, trying to look at this from every possible angle I could think of. So so a few among the elite became slave owners. Oh yeah, they were the slave owners of the South. It was a civilized tribe, y'all. And Algonquins had to be the ones who were the predominant slaves. I am very sorry. That's the only thing that makes sense. Okay. And what it I would say to follow that narrative, the five civilized tribes, it would kind of be in their interest to deliver the indentured Algonquins to the federal government to make a 14th Amendment for them. Because then the civilized tribes get to uh, basically take the land. Because now that Algonquins are being made citizens, you know, and basically Big Daddy is stepping in the hen house saying, calm down there, boy, I got it from here. Civilized tribes, I got it from here. I'll handle this one. We, we're going to make them not Indians anymore. And you, civilized tribes, you're going to go underground and we're going to put Native Americans in your place, but you're going to be the darling of the system. And you're going to be the one that always promoting Black, Negro, colored. That's your job. And you'll be good. You keep up that work and we'll pay you. So who got the better deal? This is how we got to think, y'all. Native Americans didn't. They're just placeholders. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Who got the better deal were the Indians that went underground as Black. They are working with colonizer because between colonizer and the original so-called Black civilized tribes, both of them are going to get all this Algonquin land for free. And they're going to just boss up on the Native Americans while calling the real Indians Black. So it is they who ultimately, as they planned it, I believe it was just planned. I just think it's all theater. They intended to all come up against Algonquins, the way I see it. And as a result, this is where we're getting all these weird, I want to say, anti-Black kind of government, They create you Black and then they discriminate against you because they can, because they know you're now called Black, but they also know that you were and are the Indians that got disenfranchised the most, and you would have been uncivilized Algonquins for the most part. So a few among the elite became slave owners, sometimes through intermarriage with white planters. Whites dubbed these nations the five civilized tribes. They lived in various parts of what are now Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi. They took the land of the Algonquins. However, after gold was discovered on Cherokee land, Georgia began to take the land and claim it as belonging to the state. White settlers flooded in and demanded the removal of all Native people living east of the Mississippi River. I didn't realize that it was gold that made, that sounds like they're talking about the case with Cherokee Nation against the state of Georgia, where John Marshall ruled that Georgia could take the land. Maybe that's how they got the gold, I guess. You see, Indians, whether you're a fake Indian or an Indian who has been misclassified, you're both getting not treated very well. Again, the only people who are possibly getting a good deal are those ex-civilized tribe Negroes who are now, I think, having the prominent seats in government. I believe they're in the government. I think they might be even a deep state. Who knows? but they're in a hidden position because they don't want to give the impression that quote unquote black people have any power. But they do have power because they have cred with the foreign government. And they depend on each other to have each other's back. Yeah, they both need each other very much so. They need each other. It's like a marriage made in hell. Yeah. The Negro civilized Indians who are now masquerading as black, but they might be so intermarried with Moors that they actually are black. And Congress. They need each other like family. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So in 1830, Congress and President Andrew Jackson passed the Indian Removal Act. Okay. Yeah, so they found gold, right? And the next thing is in 1830, Congress and President Andrew Jackson passed the Indian Removal Act. Over the next few years, the U.S. pressured most native nations in the East to sign treaties, pressured duress. Didn't I mention that all these treaties had to be bogus because they were done under duress? You cannot enter into a contract and have it be valid if there was an element of duress. Pressure is duress. The U.S. pressured most native nations in the East to sign treaties that gave up their lands in exchange for reserved lands, reservations, promised to them, quote unquote, forever. These were mostly in what was called Indian Territory, now Oklahoma. So they're moving, uh, you know, Northeast Indians out of the Northeast. I'm sorry, Southeast Indians out of the Southeast. And I guess what sparked this was the gold. I just didn't realize that. So once they found gold, they're saying white settlers flooded and demanded to remove. This is just so, I don't even know what to call it, like road runnerish. I just, uh, ah, episode of Road Runner or something. I don't know. It's just pitiful, man. Okay. Meanwhile, okay, the Cherokee cases. Now they're going to bring up those John Marshall cases again. Meanwhile, the Cherokee resisted removal and went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Yep, this is the three John Marshall cases in 1831 to change the annexation of their land by Georgia. Challenge the annexation. I'm sorry. They went to the Supreme Court in 1831 to challenge the annexation of their land by Georgia. Chief Justice Marshall again wrote the decision. He ruled that the Cherokees could only give up their land voluntarily and only to the U.S., not to a state like Georgia. Interesting. I don't recall reading that like that. He ruled that the Cherokees could only give up their land voluntarily and only to the U.S., not to see. That's what I was trying to say when I said that Indian tribes were really bound to the feds, not states. I think here's an example of this, but I'm pretty sure that he made them leave, give up that land. So okay, So regardless, they had to give up the land. Okay, whether it went to the state of Georgia, which that's what I thought. Let me see. He ruled that the Cherokees could only give up their land voluntarily and only to the U.S., not to a state like Georgia. Marshall went on to declare that American Indian tribes were not foreign sovereign nations, but dependent foreign nations. According to his view, the native peoples possessed only limited sovereignty. He's basing that on the doctrine of discovery. Now, that the attorney Peter DeRico makes very clear in his book, Federal Anti-Indian, the Legal Entrapment of Native Americans. I believe that's what he calls it. Or I think, or is it American Indians? The legal entrapment of American. I forgot which way he calls it, but so they did give up that land, y'all. I don't, this is reading kind of weird. All I know is that they did give up that land and the Supreme Court said they give them land somewhere else. Isn't that what we read up here somewhere? Yeah, so that was the first case. Indians had a right to occupy land, but they could not own it. See? Okay. Okay, I thought, okay. Okay. We'll read more. Marshall went on to declare that American Indian tribes were not foreign sovereign nations. Again, we're in a clause that has us ranked with, well, not we, but the Indian tribes are in a clause that ranks them with being regulated in commerce with foreign states, the several United States, and Indian tribes. So if Indians are not, if Indian tribes are not like foreign nations, why do you link them with foreign nations? Because you do not treat foreign nations like you treat Indian tribes. But again, he's basing all of this on the doctrine of discovery. So he's reinterpreting the law in light of the doctrine of discovery. So say now the Constitution reads one way. A judge in this system can read it to mean something else based on the doctrine of discovery. So what a judge has to do is look at the Constitution and come up with something, anything that undermines what the Constitution is saying, but he has a right to do that by what? The doctrine of discovery. So the judges are here to make sure that any law that could possibly favor quote unquote Native Americans gets ruled out for the doctrine of discovery. So it's a lose-lose, is what I'm trying to say. Because you're not going to get saved by any United States laws, because really the United States doesn't have jurisdiction over you if you're an American Indian not taxed. So they get to pretend that you might find justice, but the truth is they're going to defer to the doctrine of discovery. And it really won't even be overtly said. It's just going to be, they're going to either read the Constitution some cockamamie way and redefine words, but the driving force is the doctrine of discovery. So Georgia next attempted to impose its laws on Cherokee lands in 1832. When Cherokees went back to the Supreme Court, Marshall ruled this time that Cherokee treaties with the U.S. recognized their rights of self-government, rights to occupy land, not own it, and federal protection. Marshall concluded that state laws did not apply on Indian lands, but federal laws do. You see what I'm saying? Again, he's showing what I was saying, that first the feds have to come in and then they'll decide if the states get to hit that. Okay. So the federal government is like P. Diddy, and the states are like the dude that P. Diddy would call to, you know, get with whatever girl he was with. Okay. So Jackson, I'm sorry. So, however, the state of Georgia and President Jackson ignored Marshall's decision. So Jackson was notoriously prejudiced against Native people. But the decision is not in favor of Indians because you have a judge that is relying on the doctrine of discovery. Okay. So just because he's not in the mood to give it to states, he's still Big Daddy. And he is deciding what happened with Indian tribes, not the tribes. So, so let's see. Georgia next. Okay, 1832. Cherokees went back to the Supreme Court. Marshall ruled this time that Cherokee treaties with the U.S. recognized their rights of self-government, rights to occupy, not own, occupy, and federal protection. Marshall concluded that state laws did not apply on Indian land. But it is the federal government that made up the body of laws called federal Indian laws. Do Indians understand that part? Because what we're reading now, it's making it sound like John Marshall was a good guy. No, he made federal laws for these tribes, but federal having the effect of federal laws being made for Indians is, again, Indians don't have a say. It's the federal making up something that they should not have been. But again, if these are not real Indians, this is what can happen. Okay. So, yeah, it's just John Marshall saying, "This is my bitch, and you can't touch her until I say so." That's all this is. It doesn't mean that, oh, the Indians got a great deal from this wonderful judge. No. He is if the states don't have uh laws, that's telling you right there that these are federal laws that are being made for Indians. Okay? Federal. Indians are dominated by Congress and apparently the Supreme Court, who made the body of laws according to one reading that we read. So Indians are property of the District of Columbia direct. And that is the worst place to be. At least a state, like I said before, if Indians refuse to be birthright Indians and want to be state Indians, well, you might as well be a citizen of the state and not the federal. Because at least in the state, there was a notion that as a state citizen, no, it wasn't a notion, it was a fact. State citizens are not bound to the debts of the United States the same way a 14th Amendment federal citizen is. So Indians became federal 14th Amendment type of Indians. Because after they misclassified Indians black, then they made civil rights for them. So they're just, it's like going from the frying pan into the fire, y'all. Okay, so however, the state of Georgia and President Jackson ignored Marshall's decision. See, that's the state showing that it had more authority at that time, I guess, than the federal, because they went against the federal, you see? So that's also proving that it was the states that had more sovereignty than the federal at one point. Because President Jackson ignored Marshall's decision? Wow. But again, states were a higher authority than the feds at one point. Jackson was notoriously prejudiced against Native people, frequently calling them savages. Now, I guess he called the civilized tribes savages too. An estimated 15,000 Cherokee men, women, and children were forced to leave their lands in Georgia and Alabama under U.S. military threat in the winter of 1838 during the 800-mile march to Indian Territory. An estimated 4,000 of these Cherokee people, that's Iroquois, died in what survivors call the Trail of Tears. Now, this sounds really terrible, right? But I remember the shock of learning about the Trail of Death, which happened to Algonquins before the Trail of Tears. Again, but Algonquins are being erased, right? So the Iroquois are gunning for sympathy, right? But meanwhile, they were the most warring confederacy, and they were the ones that were looking to dominate the trade that one another Indians depended on, and that was the fur trade that the Algonquin Indians depended on. The Iroquois want to take that over. Okay, so when you start to feel sorry for the Trail of Tears people, just remember there was one called the Trail of Death, which sounds a lot worse. It seems to be one trail was you know, made with tears, and the other one was made with dead bodies. Okay, so which one worse? Okay, I think they're exaggerating as well, because if that many people died, then that should have been called Trail of Death. But I think, I just think it's all a lot of it is gaining sympathy for the tribes that actually became more civilized than the others. So it's like the civilized tribes looking for sympathy, but you shouldn't get it because aren't you the darling of and that's what you want it to be? This is what their version of civilized is. Enjoy it. That's what you want it to be. You took on their ways, and now you live their ways. So miss me with the pity story. I have to say it as an American Indian, knowing what happened to my Indians. My sympathy is for them. I just have to be real. Y'all, at least y'all have some level of existence. Algonquin Indians are basically genocided out of existence. All you hear about is five civilized tribes, really, and the Iroquois. It's like Algonquins just wasn't had nothing to do with this. Yet they were the first Indians that all Europeans ran into when they came here. Algonquins. That is why Algonquins are not spoken of. Colonizer don't want to deal with the one that he's supposed to be dealing with, so he'd rather deal with the enemy of the ones he's supposed to be dealing with. That's an easier win. So the U.S. did not leave American Indian nations. Okay, the title of this section is Erosion of Indian Sovereignty. The U.S. did not leave American Indian nations alone on their reservations in Indian territory. The Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, authorized white reformers and missionaries with little understanding of Native peoples to supposedly civilize them. This is what the Bureau of Indian Affairs did? Well, why don't you just call yourself the Bureau of European Affairs? The missionaries wanted Native people to become Christian farmers and abandon their own culture, language, and beliefs. Well, they did that. I thought they did that a long time ago, the civilized tribes. But they wanted to do it some more? Damn. One cruel way they did this was to take Indian children from their parents without their permission to attend boarding schools off the reservation. Off the reservation. At these schools, mainly white missionaries forced the children to conform to white American culture norms. With westward expansion throughout the 19th century came white settlers across what would become the continental United States. The U.S. annexation of most of the West after the Mexican-American War in 1848 especially led westward, moving white settlers to encroach on traditional native lands in the Great Plains and Southwest. In what became known as the Indian Wars, the U.S. Army sometimes aided by state militias, fought Native peoples defending themselves and their traditional lands from encroaching settlers. The wars ended after the Civil War, with the U.S. government forcing the tribes into new reservations. In 1871, and without consulting Native peoples, so this is what I wanted really to show how Congress moves. In 1871, and without consulting any Native people, Congress decided to end treaty making with Native nations. However, the nearly 400 treaties that had been signed since George Washington's presidency remain in effect. Don't matter because they were all bogus. You didn't need treaties because you had the doctrine of discovery, and people just need to understand that reality. We're being gaslit with this treaty talk. The only thing that the only way the treaties can serve Indians in conversations as of late is to prove that they even thought that they had a treaty with us, although those treaties were both. What that means is that you were dealing with not slaves, baby. You were dealing with the owners of the land. So you got caught in your own game because the fact that you even had treaties, however fake they were, just goes to show that you had to pretend because you were dealing with actual sovereign people. That's why you had to pretend that the treaty, because you knew, as well as the world, that we were not slaves. Indentures, even after all this crap happened, we were never really slaves. You just added that element because you needed us to be permanent slaves, but we didn't have to be permanent slaves because we always had our sovereign standing, evidenced by the treaties. We were indentures on our own land. And after losing in these quote unquote beaver wars, so then we became responsible for paying the debts that were incurred. That's how they were able, I believe, to take away our land. Oh, you can't pay, so we just take your land. Move up north and get a job, run for shit. So in 1871, without consulting any native people, trust me, they don't have to. The native, well, real American Indians are not represented in Congress. Okay? They're not supposed to be. That means Congress ain't supposed to be doing diddly squat with us, but getting out of our way and giving up our land and thinking about reparations. So in 1871, and without consulting any native people, Congress decided to end treaty making with native nations. However, the early nearly 400 treaties that had been signed since George Washington remain in effect. Up until 1885, Indian tribal courts handled criminal cases for crimes that occurred on reservations. But in that year, Congress passed the Major Crimes Act that transferred the jurisdiction of most felony crimes on a reservation to the U.S. federal courts. As we will see, this law is still important to understanding American Indian sovereignty today. In 1886, the Supreme Court upheld the Major Crimes Act. This decision by the court allowed Congress to exercise plenary power. Now, plenary power is not mentioned in the Constitution, as we always say, or unlimited authority over Indian affairs. That was in 1886. But again, they're talking about Native Americans. By this time, the real Negro Indians are just pushing black agenda, y'all. They're calling the Indians black, and they're allowing Native Americans to be seen as the real Indians. General Allotment Act. In 1887, Congress passed the General Allotment Act, aka the Dawes Act, with no Indian involvement or consent. Here's another example of something happening with Congress and no Indians represented, no voice of the so-called Native Americans. So this is how this system deals with us to this day. Well, we're called black, so they're trying to push a narrative that we're African. But they don't have to listen to anybody that's not standing as a sovereign like Indians should be standing and are. In 1887, Congress passed the General Allotment Act, aka the Dawes Act, with no Indian involvement or consent. This law offered allotments to parcels of reservation lands to individual Native men who were expected to become farmers. They would get actual ownership of their allotments and become U.S. tax-paying citizens after 25 years. The goals of this act were to abolish the tribes by dividing tribal lands and to assimilate Indian white American society. This is done without Indian involvement, right? A decision was made. Okay. The Kiowa Nation, who had been forced into a reservation southwestern Oklahoma, 1867, sued the U.S. over the Dawes Act. They argued that it violated a treaty that said tribal lands could be broken up only with the consent of 3/4 of all adult Kiowa men. You see, this, as we read, with no Indian involvement or consent. The Congress passed this Dawes Act. In 1903, the Supreme Court decided that Congress could allot the tribal land of the Kiowa and all other Native nations without their consent, even if doing so meant the U.S. government was breaking a treaty. Hello. So do you see why Indians, there is no winning in this system? You have to stand up as a sovereign when you address this beast. And you got to show them what the Constitution said. Now, I do believe they had to say that in that Constitution, just like they had to make treaties to make it look good. But unfortunately, they have to now go by that. And what that will do, going by the treaty, will establish that Indians are sovereign and they're not any kind of dependent anything. We were taken over in conquest by a doctrine from a church, no less. We were sovereign before you came, and somewhere after you came, you started redefining sovereignty. However, we're going to go back to what we were. We want our land back because it is not possible for a people to exist without direct connection and direct control of all of their land. Why would we even want you to stay at this point? Look what you're doing. Now, this you're doing to, granted, it is Indians that you created. But the fact that this is being done and the real Indians are watching this, why would we want to deal with you? You're making it seem like you could do that to real Indians. So you would do it to us if we let you. We can't let you. We have to prove to this federal government that Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 has nothing to do with Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. They like to lump it together. Of course you do. It gives you the upper hand. It gives you this plenary authority that's not even written in the Constitution. What you're doing is going by the doctrine of discovery. Truly, we shouldn't even be having an argument with you about the Constitution, because all you're really going by is a doctrine of discovery. What we should be saying to you is that that doctrine of discovery, as I always say, has been repudiated. Where is your authority coming from now? The windmills of your Moroccan, Moorish imagination? That's not good enough. It'll work in Morocco. It cannot work here. This is why we had to read this, guys, because we have to see the beast for what it is. It will fool you, making up laws that it does not have to go by, just like it made up treaties that it doesn't have to go by, just like it made up a constitution that it doesn't have to go by. Indians, we have to take our land back because this is all genocide. This is all genocide. In their system, they're not allowed to genocide. We're not in their system, but we can call out the genocide as sovereigns and as the original people of the land. This entity, all it has done while it's here is compromise everything that relates to an American Indian's welfare. You're messing with the food. We're like hanging from a cliff to be on our land, and we're paying taxes to be on our land. We shouldn't be paying anything. And that would be our reparations. That would be the beginning of our reparations, not paying anything into the system. So you can't figure out how to give us anything. So then all you got to do is stop asking us to pay for anything. And our land is ours freely. We don't need any documentation. When your cops stop us, we don't have to produce an ID. We're not in your jurisdiction. Officer, have a good day. Get your hand off my car. I got places to go. Seriously, that is what being a sovereign Indian means. Their cops don't have jurisdiction to stop you because you're not supposed to even have a driver's license. You have whatever you make up. This is my tribal driver's license. It will be an ID because we're not going to make all these different, pieces of documents that they have. We don't need it. All we need is something telling them perhaps what tribe we stem from and that we're not in their jurisdiction. That's how this will go. It's called taking back your birthright in a peaceful, civil manner. We have no choice. We have no choice. Okay, so the Kiowa Indians, the Supreme Court decided that Congress could allot the tribal land of the Kiowa and all other native nations. So one tribe of Indians goes into the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court makes a judgment that applies to all other Indians, not just the Kiowa. What kind of beast are we dealing with? Do you see? That was a Kiowa case. How are you going to make that apply to all? And they didn't even go to court. So you're just going to, in one fell swoop, you're just going to disenfranchise every other native nation without their consent, even if doing so meant the US government was breaking a treaty. The court ruled that all Indian matters were within the plenary control of Congress, y'all. All Indian matters. Now, we saw that it was commerce, right? Didn't we say in the last video that it went beyond commerce to every move that an Indian could possibly make? What kind of beast are we dealing with, ladies and gentlemen? Do you see it? Can you see it now? And this is just something it gets to do because of the doctrine of discovery. So that's the good thing. The good thing about all of this, ladies and gentlemen, is that when you see people acting in law, no less, acting unjust, unfair, and you wonder how they can do it, I'm telling you how they did it. The doctrine of discovery said they could take what they want. And that's exactly what this judge is ruling to do. He doesn't care about the treaties, y'all. And we shouldn't either. They tell us that we should look to the treaties. I say, what the fuck for? They are bogus because they were done under duress. The only thing we could use those treaties for is to show that we were not slaves. You don't treaty with slaves. That's all they good for, y'all. This government don't have to go by them, so why should we waste our time going through these the way it's written? And somebody you can't even understand some of this crap because Indians had nothing to do with it. That's why I told y'all Indians were not in a position. The way this government is looking at you, you are not in a position to handle affairs. You don't create no governments up in here. The only reason why we saying that you did is so that it could look like we cooperated with your dumb ass. You didn't have a say. Just read what we just read, y'all. How could you possibly have a say? In making laws. And I want to say, we have to separate. We must separate. You better figure out if you are part colonizer and how big is that part. Because if you had anything to do with the creation of this legal system, it does not owe you any reparations. Get it? Get it? You got to separate in order to even think about this thing owing you reparations. Because if you're saying you created it or this is derived of something you did, they can use that against you. They can say, well, you said you designed this way. We just going by your design. Why we owe you anything? Why? Get out. Know that you did anything even if you did create it, The doctrine of discovery superseded it. But I just have to be clear. This government tells you who they credit this system to. And Indians have to decide, do you want to be linked with those Indians that colonizers said gave them the go-ahead to do this and who gave them the system of government called a democracy, I guess they calling it. Indians have to let go of the kumbaya moment just so that we can begin to navigate in this thing the way we need to do it right. Do not align yourself with Iroquois if you don't have to. It's the last thing you should be doing if you expect to have a complaint against the system. This system credits the Iroquois Confederacy for all it does. It names the Iroquois Confederacy specifically. But the civilized tribes are just the same. Indians have to learn to separate from what the trader Indians have done. I'm not saying attack them. I'm not saying curse them out. I'm not saying anything like that. All I'm saying is know your lane. If you're not Iroquois, do not take responsibility for what they have done. That is all. Is that fair? I think it is. I think it's fair and right. Let Iroquois take all its accolades by themselves. And those who agree with that, like the five civilized tribes, you go ahead and do the same. Um, yeah, take your flowers, as it were. But ain't nobody trying to share them flowers with you if they're an Indian who wants their birthright back. You got to decide what Indians ever wanted you to have a birthright and can they be your allies? Again, you don't have to harm them. You don't have to attack them. There need not be any bloodshed. Just know your lane. Stay out of what the compromised Indians have established. And if you are Iroquois or if you are of the five civilized tribes, you don't have to agree with what they did. Isn't that a revolutionary, evolutionary idea? Yeah, but it's the truth. You can claim your heritage and say, and I don't agree with what my tribe did. They had a democracy, they say. So you can agree to disagree. Right? Right. Or can you? I don't know, because it seems like this whole system is foul. But hey, that's the system y'all created. You said it's supposed to be a democracy, right? Well, well, I just all I'm saying is there are ways for Indians to get out if they want to. If you know that the difference between wrong and real wrong, then you don't have to take part in it. You can actually say, nope, I'm not down with it. You don't have to be down with it. You don't have to take a legacy that you don't agree with. Even if it's yours, you can say, well, yes, I'm an Iroquois. Yes, one of the five civilized tribes. And I don't agree with what they did. That doesn't make me not an Indian. I still have my birthright. They can't take that away. So you can be a better Indian. You could be the redemption of your Indian. Um, mm-mm. So the court ruled, Supreme Court, y'all, that all Indian matters were within the plenary control of Congress. Congress is your daddy. Congress is your boss, unless you tell them that they're not, due to Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 is like a diving board. It is not the end of the line. It is the beginning of the line. From there, that's how you claim your land. Because they're going to be arguing some foolishness about, but we still want to control you. No, I'm sorry, you can't. You can control the tribes you create. But if you ever treated with me, you know damn well I was supposed to be seen as a sovereign. And if I lost some Indian war, that doesn't designate me to eternal subjugation by a foreign, because I won or lost a war that was unjust to begin with, because it was like three forces against one. If the French were not being a full-fledged ally like they should have been, if they're going to be an ally, then it was 3-1. It was the British, the Iroquois, and the French against Algonquins. Listen, French, nobody wants a half-ass anything. So in the final analysis, I find you to be, as your scripture says, lukewarm. You're lukewarm. You have betrayed Algonquins. Let the record reflect. Let the record reflect. With your half-ass dedication, you never respected us, at the very least. You wanted all the pelts we could possibly give you, but you still didn't respect that we had a right to not be Christian. And so you're just as bad as any colonizer, because your alliance didn't do anything. I think you held back and allowed Algonquins to lose. So I guess I would have to respect the more real, or the more what's the word, earnest colonizer than the fake one. At least the British, you knew what the hell they were about. It's the French of that kind of, those kind of shenanigans, that you never know how it's going to go. Again, if you're fighting on my side, how are we going to win if you won't give me the ammunition? I've sat with that, and I guess I refuse to really look at it. But the bottom line is, you're supposed to be my ally. If you're not supplying me with the weapons you have, you're not allying with me. You're half-assing me. And that is partly why Algonquins lost in the Beaver Wars against the Iroquois. They were fighting three different ratchet ass entities. And the sad part is, of all three, at least the British were genuinely enemies. Genuinely. Iroquois were traitors to all Indians. I don't care what nobody says at this point. I've lost everything as an Algonquin. What have I got to lose now by telling the fucking truth? Iroquois are just Moors to begin with. So it's not even like I'm really dissing American Indians. I'm dissing the side of their family that misled them at best. French, again, of the three, well, you're not as, let's put you this way, you're not as bad as the Iroquois, okay? Uh, yeah. I had to say it because it had to be said. I think I've allowed myself to live in a sort of fog about the French, because there's a part of me that wants to believe that they actually did respect my people. But if, again, I'll just say it one more time, if you're going to be my ally, you got to do it all the way. If you're holding back, you are absolutely no good for anything that you get yourself into if you're not doing it with the dedication and the commitment required. What good are you? So really what they're saying is what I think they're really saying is I'm going to win anyway. I'm colonizer. So even if I don't help you, somehow I'm going to win. And the message is received. The message is received. There will come a day when you will all go home. And this will never happen again. If karma has anything to do with it, well, I'll just leave you to her. The effects of the Dawes Act, upheld by the Supreme Court decision, were devastating. During the nearly 50 years that the law was in effect, Native nations lost two-thirds of their reservation land. The federal government sold 90 million surplus, quote unquote surplus, acres of reservation lands to mainly white settlers. This must have been what Martin Luther King was talking about with the Homestead. Sounds like the Homestead Act. The BIA enforced policies that weaken or abolish tribal governments, courts, and laws. The BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, no less. Again, why don't we call a thing a thing? Why don't you just call yourself Bureau of European Affairs, Bureau of Colonizer Affairs? You ain't doing nothing for my ancestors. Don't lie to yourself. Don't lie to us. Dealing with a bunch of crooks, y'all. Do you get that? None of them are here to help. We have to take a stand outside of them as the sovereign we are. And as I always say, we are peaceful Indians. Uh, the Constitution says what it says. It's not the best document by any stretch, but they had to make it look good, and now Indians are going to make good on that look good. And that's going to be our ticket out of here, y'all. That's going to be our ticket out of here. And there's two. The BIA also prohibited Indians from practicing their native religions. Wow, BIA. Speaking their native languages and performing traditional ceremonies. Reduction of federal aid weakened Indian health and economic well-being. What the freak is the BIA here for except to do the bidding of Congress? In 1924, Congress passed a law that made all American Indians U.S. citizens. Now, again, I wish they would put it like they put it before, without Indian input. Congress passed a law that made all American Indians U.S. citizens. Federal. U.S. citizens is federal, has nothing to do with the states. As I said before, it is the federal that is dominating American Indians. Many Native people welcomed now having the right to vote. They were delusional. While many others, such as the Onondaga people of New York, opposed the law. They saw it as an attempt by federal government to coerce Native people to assimilate to whites. You think? To white society and to undermine tribal sovereignty. Of course it does. You should have saw that when they stopped making treaties. But then again, you aren't you part of the civilized Onondaga people of New York? As political scientist and member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, David E. Wilkins has written, Native people did not ask for U.S. citizenship, but rather the 1924 law thrust citizenship upon them without their consent. There we go. There we go. We've read at least 3 points where Indians had no say, and these are the Indians that this government has grabbed up into their jurisdiction through commerce. This document is much or crucial than I gave it credit for. It's really that what we just read right there. I need to include this with my paperwork. I did, but I only included the first page, I think, of this. I really need to have this whole document. It's a lot of paperwork I sent out. And I'm still at it, y'all. Yeah, I have to write some more because I'm fighting the Department of Finance. How can you tax an Indian not taxed? And they are acting like they don't know what I'm talking about. Um, yeah, so I can't unknow what I know. You know, I can't allow unlawfulness to be the what I settle for. I can't. But anyway, a politician and member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. Now let me see what the Lumbee are. Probably Muskogee, but let's see. You think after all of this, the civilized tribes would get a clue. Maybe they just don't know because they're being lied to by Moors. But linguistic. I think they must go Lumbee. Okay, this is interesting. Actually, this is very interesting. The Lumbee tribe primarily speaks a unique dialect of English known as Lumbee, while their ancestral roots trace back to various indigenous groups speaking Siouan, Algonquin, and Iroquois. So their language today is a distinct variety of English with influences from British, English, Scots, and Scotch Irish. Oh, so the Moors. Very interesting. Well, of all those languages, all the Indian ones and the English, I would gather, Algonquin is older. Oh Lord. It says here, what is an Lumbee Indian mix? A Lumbee Native American tribe with a mixed ancestors, primarily descended from Siouan-speaking tribes. Also, now they're Siouan. What was the other one? What did the other one say? Did they say Siouan before? Yeah, they did. Okay, Siouan tribe with European and African heritage. That's wrong. They never get on that African, yo. But that could be the Moorish side of their film. The civilized tribes were basically, that's what the article read said, not me. Maybe we'll link it. Um, so the Indian Reorganization Act, it just gets worse and worse, huh? Congress sought to reverse American Indian policy during President Franklin Roosevelt's. John Collier, the new head of the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, but it should be called Bureau of European Affairs, Bureau of Colonizer Affairs, opposed assimilation policies. Oh, it's too late now, wouldn't you say? With native input. This is the first time they had native input. Okay. Collier drafted a bill that became the Indian Reorganization Act, enacted by Congress in 1934. Again, Congress is not supposed to be making or even signing any of our laws as real. Okay. All this back and forth with Congress and the BIA. One year they decide to involve Indians after they done did the most. It just not making sense, y'all. When you are dividing your power with a colonizer, it's a toss up with mostly toss downs to you. Okay. You just gotta get out of it altogether and be the sovereign Indian you are if you are in fact American Indian. So the law repealed the Dawes Act of 1887, ending the devastating allotment system and allowed tribes to write their own constitutions. All allowed that. What kind of sovereign has to be allowed to write their own constitution? Oh, give me strength. That used to say. The federal government gave money subsidy to tribes that adopted constitutions modeled on the U.S. Constitution. Remember, I told you about that. I think I mentioned this because I had read it before I did my last video. I read through this. So look how the bias is shown. So the federal government gave money, subsidies to tribes that adopted. See how they get you to do things? See how money works in colonizers' favor? You see? All you gotta do is flip some fiat at you and boom, you're doing exactly what he wants you to do for a little bit of fiat. Now you don't have any land rights, but you got some fiat. And you's big and bad now. After you purchase everything that money can buy, I think maybe that's when the more hard-headed of us realize that money cannot buy you uh, your own dignity, the dignity of being sovereign. That's a dignity for you. Having to be on your own land and be run by a foreigner, there's no dignity in that, if you ask me. It's a shame. It's shameful. It's pitiful. I just can't do it. I feel now the rest of my uh, days, I just can't consciously settle for subservience. When I know it, they don't just leave you alone. That's the thing. You don't get left alone. You're going to be effed with, even if you try to just take your little bit of money and go sit down somewhere with your new car, your new stereo, your new this, your new that, whatever. It's just, you don't just get to walk into the sunset when you're being dominated, no matter how much money. And then in their system, they're going to be coming at you for taxes and all of that. And so you being slave, you're just being a slave, you know, and doing a dance for a little dollar. And that can't build self-esteem. It just, I don't see how, I mean, maybe at first you won't even realize, but after a while, it's like it's just like being the ultimate prostitute. Oh, it's just it truly it's just it's, as they say, nasty work. So the federal government gave money subsidies to tribes that adopted. That's all tribes are doing, just dancing to the money beat of colonizer, dancing to the green dollar beat of colonizer. It's like colonizer says, well, would you get on your four knees and bark for me? Hell no. Not even for some subsidies. Um, is there a particular dog bark that you prefer? Poodle. But I'm like 200 pounds. Poodle. What about Mama do? Poodle. Okay. Federal government gave money. So okay, we read that to the ground. Uh, it gave money such tribes that adopted constitutions modeled on the U.S. Constitution. Damn. Writing about the IRA in 1983, Standing Rock SEAL historian Vine Deloria Jr. and his co-author Clifford Little described the controversy of the new tribal constitution. The experience of self-government, they wrote, according to Indian traditions, had eroded. And while the new constitutions were akin to the traditions of some tribes, they were completely foreign to others. Okay, so yeah. While most Native nations accepted the IRA's terms, Indian Reorganization Act terms, some did not. Most notably, the Navajo Nation. In 1934, the Navajo were the largest Native population inhabiting a reservation that stretched across parts of Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. Now, we got to remember, those parts of the United States started out as territories. So the way I see it is that they were slaves from the beginning. At least the 13 colonies, they had a moment when they were actually the highest sovereign that they could be behind Indians in this system. So the states started out before the feds, but now the feds come along and they are creating territories that they will dominate. Ultimately, the feds dominate anything that they ushered in. The feds did not make the states. The states were here, although the states are foreign too. They were here before the feds were here. So that's why they have a dominant position. But the feds turned that all the way around when they adopted this 14th Amendment. What the 14th Amendment did was it stripped the states of its state citizens, and they became United States or District of Columbia citizens. So it's like the feds came and sucked out the sovereigns from the states. They had a level of sovereignty in that system. So once the feds control the state citizens and the state citizens are now federal citizens, they don't really, there's no state anymore. All the men and women have been hijacked by the federal citizenship. So this is what happened, I believe, with all the everything that wasn't the 13 states. They were territories that were made into states by the feds, but they were not really states. The difference between the territories that were made into states and the 13 states is that one was created by the feds and the other was not. When you're created by the feds, they really are your boss. Now, none of them created American Indians. Okay? So they are not our boss. They are just people that came here with a church doctrine and went all the way with it. But now the church has repudiated the doctrine of discovery. And it is up to Indians to figure out, Heru is trying to tell you, why you should not be a federal citizen, a state citizen, a domestic dependent, a civilized, a federalized, a 501c3 type of Indian. You need to be Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 Indians not taxed, so that you can not have to pay into this federal system. That will really take a lot of their power away, because the power is in the dollars passing through Indian hands. I realize when the money comes through Indians, that is like a bloodletting. And so the vampire gets fed because Indians are putting their basically what they call blood, sweat, and tears into making that money. So as I said before, money that is, or fiat that is sifted through American Indians is like ambrosia to the federal system. They love that money. It's like money going through a gold dust when it goes through Indians' hands, because it has all the suffering of your ancestors in it, as well as your soul, because you work hard for your money and you're not really getting paid as much. So $1 from an Indian is almost like $100 from any other race when it gets back to the feds. They can run that, they can put that shit on the altar and they're gonna get some. Their demon deity is gonna bless them immediately. Expedite, what do you call it? What, how do you say it, Ti? Expeditiously. Yes. Yes. They love having us suffer out them dollars back to them, yo. Yeah. It's the sweetest money on earth. Hmm. It's like birthright money. Hmm. Yep. That's energy. Hmm. Then the whole world want them fiats. Right, Africa? Are you trying to get a little piece of me? Yeah. But you guys are gonna, until you take your sovereignty seriously, you're gonna be a slave to everybody. All y'all want is, all y'all are really about that money. You know, I know a lot of Americans are, but Africans, I think y'all, I don't know. There's something with you in a relationship that you have with particularly foreign money, because I mean, at least we can say this shit was printed with our trees and our on our land mass. Um, I don't know, Africa. You really been showing your true colors, and it's a good thing. We're glad. We're happy because we really. This is a time for people to know who their real allies truly are. Um, and I mean, let's give Africa a little bit of a break. I mean, who are they going to be closer to, Europeans or Americans? I mean, look at the map. Who are they going to more ally with? Okay, so we just got to understand that that's not us. That's all. It's not good. It's not bad. It is what it is, and I'm good with that. I just don't want the fuckery that keep calling us African American, and then Africans get automatically called in, and ain't nobody called you. It's just that it's mass programming, and so we're being linked together. But I think I think of the both of us, Africans should know better that we're not them. I mean, yeah, we got a government that lying to us every day, yeah. But I think Africans in on this, they should know better. They should know that we're not African. And and I don't believe they should be calling us Americans. Yeah. And when they refer to Europeans, they should call them Europeans. If you are like in any way, shape, or form kin to American Indians, you should be calling us Americans and call what you call Europeans European, right? That would begin to show us that you have an idea. But I think, unfortunately, I just feel that Africans just follow whoever they think has the money. And if it means dissing what they're calling African Americans, then so be it. I just feel like that's what's going on here. And I think that's an issue that Africa really has to deal with and understand that that has nothing to do with American Indians. Like your your any poverty that you're experiencing has nothing to do with American Indians, but it has more to do with your leaders. And instead of, bad mouthing Americans, I think they need to really come down on the people that's running their country that looks like them and really get real with that. Something is up because it's just something is up. Uh, in America, we have the excuse, and it's a real one. We're not run by our people. But in Africa, it doesn't seem like that's the case. It looks like you have leaders that look just like you. So that means they are overtly uh, not having your best interests. You know, um, I mean, you hear, I can't even go with that because most of the surveys you look at, or if you look to find what countries are most impoverished, the last time I looked, why is Africa on that list when if they're so rich in gold and diamonds? I don't, and what role are the leaders playing in that? Or is it just a way, a look that is a political tool of some sort, you know? All I really know is that we really need to separate. So at least we can learn to respect whatever there is to respect. But if we don't separate, I think there's a lot of boundaries going to be crossed that shouldn't be crossed. Um, Self-determination. Okay, let me see. Where do we leave off? The Termination Act. After World War II, the trend in U.S. policy swung back to enforcing assimilation. Is that where we left off? Yeah. In 1953, Congress passed the Termination Act. This act, so and we could assume that that was out without Indian input, right? Most of this was without Indian, except for the one instance we read where the BIA had Indian. In 1953, Congress passed the Termination Act. This act sought to permanently abolish all the tribes and end any U.S. responsibility for them. This would mean ending services like health and education, which had long been a U.S. trust responsibility in many treaties with Native nations. Between 1953 and the late 1960s, the federal government ended its relationship with over 100 tribes. The U.S. distributed reservation land to tribal members and sold other tribal land to non-native people. The federal government also turned over its legal jurisdiction over terminated tribes to the states. And that's what I was talking about in my last video when I said it's like they played ping pong. The federal government says, here, you take them. And then the states are in charge. But they got the go-ahead from the real boss, which is the feds. So again, between 1953 and the late 1960s, the federal government terminated or ended its relationship with over 100 tribes. The U.S. distributed reservation land to tribal members and sold other land to other tribal land, sorry, to non-native people. How the hell do they do that? This is just an ugly system. This is an ugly system. Given tribal, why would you give, you say allegedly holding a trust? How are you giving stuff that belongs? Anyway, I can't even say that. See, every time I go to argue, I have to remind myself that we're dealing with Native Americans here, not American Indians. What if it's something like maybe the land is going to, I don't know, to the former Negro civilized Indians? Maybe that's what's happening. They take from the Native Americans and give to the now black Indians who are now black Negro colored. And maybe that's what's happening. I don't know. Because I just feel like they have to favor the Indians that have gone underground to help the federal system in making all Indians disappear and become black. But they will be the black, like, that get the bad treatment, while you'll always see those blacks in high positions and wonder why nothing seems to change. While they be warming them seats for hundreds of years, you know, like somebody that's as old as Maxine Waters. And I'm just amazed because I feel like how long can you be in a position and it just seems like, I don't know, you're just there. You know, that's all I'm saying. You know, but then you're there and you don't acknowledge that there are even original Indians. See, that's the other thing. You know, how is it that everyone in Congress, no matter what race, does not think that it is possible for there to be original Indians that are not Mongolian when they have their Verrazano telling them what Indians look like? It just goes. Why is everybody programmed to think that in terms of Native American, to think in terms of Native American? I'm going to stop share for a minute and I shall return. We're back. Um, and I think we'll actually get through this article. It's 6 pages, and we're at page 4. And I think basically one more page with credits at the bottom, I think, of or at the last page, I hope. So we read that the Termination Act after World War II, the trend in U.S. policy. See, we're just trends in this country as American Indians, or at least our place keepers. They just have fun with them, right? We are just, that's a whole other story, right? Because we're African Americans. But anyway, looking at how they treat the Fakians should give us a clue to how they would hope to treat us, right? After World War II, the trend in U.S. policy swung back to enforcing assimilation. So this was without Indians asking to assimilate, right? Of course. In 1953, Congress passed the Termination Act. All Congress does is sit down and just make all decisions for Indians, just like we said. Dominated, 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 right? And then when we awakening Indians start speaking, they're going to try to pull this crap on us too. But you see, we have to insist on Article 1, Section 2 plus 3 and challenge the Commerce Clause because as sovereigns, we need to get compensated in any way we choose for the land that's being used until people realize that home is where the heart is. In 1953, Congress passed the Termination Act. This act sought to permanently abolish all the tribes. So we read this already. Uh, and end any U.S. responsibility for them. So Congress getting tired of this game, right? So they're going to pass it on to the states. This would mean ending services like health and education, which had long been a U.S. trust responsibility in many treaties with native nations. Treaties were all bogus. Between 1953 and the late 1960s, the federal government ended its relationship with over 100 tribes. The U.S. distributed reservation land to tribal members and sold to, other tribal land to non-native people. So that means they're still getting paid. They move the Fakians off the land, sell it, and the money goes right to the Fed. So they are taking our land as if it's theirs. But again, all the Native Americans to do is say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And that's how the feds like it. It's really a horrid situation. Someone could just take something that is supposed to be yours, they sell it, and you don't see a dime. Yet you're losing. You're moving, but you're not being compensated. You got a haul tail, but you ain't even getting compensated. Just move over so I can sell this land and get paid. The U.S. distributed reservation land to tribal members and sold other tribal land to non-native people. Federal government also turned over its legal jurisdiction over ter, ter I'm sorry, over terminated tribes to the states. Okay. After they terminated the tribes, then they just gave to the states. Here. It's your responsibility now. You pay for these suckers. Self-determination. Urged by President Nixon, Congress yet again radically changed American Indian policy in the late 1960s by rejecting the termination policy in 1968. Oh, so now they rejected the termination. It's just ping pong, y'all. You don't know what's going to happen. One day they feel like doing something for you. Next day they say, I don't feel like that today. Okay, so now they're rejecting the termination policy. In 1968, Congress passed the Indian Civil Rights Act. Oh Lord, like as if that's the big help, right? Civil rights, oh boy, which applied most, but not all, of the U.S. Bill of Rights to Native people on reservations. They are having pimp daddy fun with these civilized tribes, y'all. While guaranteeing freedom of religion, the Indian Civil Rights Act did not prohibit the establishment of religion by tribes because of their historic tribal religion. Oh, what the hell? Wait a minute. While guaranteeing freedom of religion, the Indian Civil Rights Act did not prohibit the establishment of religion by tribes because of their historic tribal religions. I don't know what that means, y'all. Let's try this one more time. While guaranteeing freedom of religion, the Indian Civil Rights Act did not prohibit the establishment of religion by tribes because of their historic tribal religion. Also, while it guaranteed criminal jury trials on reservations, the Indian Civil Rights Act did not guarantee juries in civil cases, leaving traditional tribal courts to decide these matters. Aw. In 1975, Congress passed the Indian Self-Determination Act. This law once promoted self-government and greater tribal sovereignty. Okay, this law once more promoted self-government and greater tribal sovereignty. So they just deciding what your sovereignty is going to be. The tribes now had the authority to administer reservation health care, schools, police, child custody, and many other programs that the federal government had long controlled. The act further recognized that the U.S. still had a trust responsibility to protect tribal treaty rights, lands, and resources. Self-determination also meant encouraging the tribal governments to develop economic enterprises. The most successful of these, has been Indian gaming casinos. Board. Although only about a third of the tribes in the U.S. have them on their reservations today. Indian casinos are located on reservation land, but the tribes do not have the complete sovereign control over them. Once again, in 1988, Congress intervened by passing the Indian Gaming Regulation Act. This act requires a tribal government to negotiate an agreement with the state over what games are allowed and what regulations are required before the U.S. Department of Interior approves the casino. Everything has to be approved. You don't have any sovereignty, y'all. You just, yes, daddy, yes, daddy. Okay, that's what we're doing here, okay? Nothing any Indian should ever aspire to, because this is just, ugh, ugh. Ancestors rolling over in their grave. While the states cannot tax casino revenue, they may collect a percentage of the earnings for state regulation costs. So it costs to regulate commerce. You got to pay for them to dominate your ass. Isn't that wonderful? Boy, it's hard reading this, y'all. It's just, ew. Ooh, boy. Ooh, boy. Ooh, boy. It's a lot. It's a lot. So they're regulating gaming, not commerce, gaming. And Indians not taxed, well, as we see, the states may collect a percentage of earnings for state regulation costs. Some tribes distribute casino profits to tribal members. However, most use the revenue to pay for health clinics, schools, jobs, and other benefits for the entire tribe. Indian sovereignty today, non-existent. What are you talking about? Today, there are over 550 federally recognized Indian tribes. My God. All those slaves, my God, in more than 30 states. However, many Native Americans do not live on reservations. Federalism, or the sharing of power, sovereigns don't have to share power, by states and the federal government, can be complex. Yeah, it's unconstitutional too. Well, unless you created the new Indians called Native Americans. So too is the sharing of power between sovereign tribal governments, state governments, and federal government. Congress claims, and the Supreme Court agrees, that Congress has plenary or unlimited power over these special nations. Special means unconstitutional. Okay, that's what I've started to realize. But again, because it's unconstitutional, Congress can do whatever they want because there's no law. They make up the laws as they go. That's what Congress is doing. They don't have a constitution to go by. They make up laws for federal Indians, okay? They don't go by anything. They make it up as they go along. They are having pimp daddy fun with these hoes in this house. So let's read that previous paragraph one more time. Federalism, or the sharing of power by states and the federal government, can be complex. So too is the sharing of power between sovereign tribal governments, state governments, and the federal government. Yeah, because it shouldn't be shared. That's why it's so complex, because it don't make no damn sense. Ain't nobody checking the federal government, is there? So why that's why it don't make sense. A real sovereign wouldn't be checked by one, let alone two foreign entities. Congress claims, and the Supreme Court agrees, that's why the Supreme Court is so damn janky, y'all, that Congress has plenary or it's not even in the Constitution. That's what gets me. The idea that none of this is in the Constitution. But again, if you create something that doesn't exist in the Constitution, well, you got to make some kind of laws for them, right? Because they ain't in the Constitution. That's what I think Congress loves the most. That kind of unchecked power to dominate. Congress claims and the Supreme Court agrees that Congress has plenary or unlimited power over these special nations, even if the U.S. violates treaties it made with American Indians. So yeah, if even if they're in their power, they violate treaties, it's okay. Are we hearing this? This is absolute chaos, y'all. This is supposed to be like some kind of land for freedom and all of this. How could the alleged Native Americans be so dominated even if it, in a land of the free, even if they're fake? It's supposed to be free, like some kind of free place, whatever. That's because they're very well aware of who the boss really is, and that's why they have to oppress the real boss. So and they say that, and nobody checks this. No, there's nobody to say, what are you doing and how are you doing that? Because they got the doctrine of discovery on their side, but that has been repudiated. Congress claims and the Supreme Court agrees that Congress has plenary or unlimited power over these special nations. When they say special, they must mean like as if they're autistic, but they sure do treat them like they handicapped, yo. Even if the U.S. violates treaties it made with American Indians. So it can violate treaties with American because the treaties are fake. Listen, we gotta understand the reason why they can do all this because all these entities are fake. They're not legitimate. Native Americans are not in the Constitution. Um, Treaties are fake because of the doctrine of discovery. So even though it sounds really bad what we're reading, technically, this is all gravy, yo. It's just that they know who they have to oppress. These other ones they can dominate, so there's no need for them to oppress them. They have to oppress the real Indians because the ones that they are having fun with can't do nothing but say yes, sir, yes, ma'am. However, the Supreme Court ruled that certain treaty provisions must be respected. The Supreme Court has ruled that certain all of this has nothing to do with what the Indians are saying, really. It's what the federal wants to do. The McGirt case. I think they're thinking that this is the one good thing that might help Indians, fakings. In 2020, the Supreme Court issued a landmark decision regarding Native sovereignty. Jim C. McGirt, a Native American, oh boy, was convicted of a felony by an Oklahoma state court. The crime took place in Oklahoma on lands reserved for the Creek Nation. As a permanent home by a treaty with the U.S. in 1833. So the crime took place in Oklahoma on land reserved for the Creek Nation as a permanent home by a treaty with the U.S. in 1833. McGirt appealed, arguing that a federal court should have tried him instead of the Oklahoma State Court. Recall that under the Major Crimes Act, the U.S. government, not Oklahoma, had jurisdiction over criminal cases. Oklahoma argued that the Creek Reservation had been disestablished or abolished during the allotment period that we read about just now in early 20th century and was now state territory. However, writing for the 5-4 majority, Justice Neil Gorsuch ruled that Congress had never acted to disestablish the Creek Reservation. Therefore, the now called Muskogee Creek Nation lands, comprising almost half of Oklahoma's territory, still legally existed and were not state territory. Oh, wow. McGirt was entitled to a new trial in federal court. Moreover, the court's decision restored the Muskogee Nation a major element of its sovereignty. Oh, it gave you back some sovereignty. Oh, it's holding it for you? Oh, okay. Affirming the federal government's responsibility to honor treaty obligations. On the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise. Uh, Justice Gorsuch wrote, "Today we hold the government to its word." Just for that day, y'all. He just said for today. Today. We don't know what tomorrow will bring because Indians don't have no control of the tomorrow. It's Congress has plenary authority, okay? So on the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise, Justice Gorsuch wrote. Today, and just for today, we hold the government to its word. Julian Brave, Noise Cat, a member of the Secwepemc, uh, Secwepemc, and Saint Akimi nations in Canada wrote in July 2020, in the long indigenous struggle for justice, McGirt versus Oklahoma might be one of the most important Supreme Court cases of all time. The McGirt decision made the important point that all treaties still matter. And then we have for writing and discussion. Summarize how the Constitution defined relations between the United States and Native nations. It defined it as they dominate Native nations with plenary authority in commerce. And Native Americans are not in the Constitution. Okay? The Indian Civil Rights of 1968 applies most, but not all of the U.S. Bill of Rights to Native Americans on reservations. Why did Congress leave out certain rights? Do you agree? Why or why not? Why did Congress leave out certain rights? Well, because it's a foreign government. Um, this government was established for quote unquote white Europeans to have to be citizens and to have these Bill of Rights sort of rights. So that's why um, Congress left out certain rights because they truly are not in support of even Fakians having equal footing with white citizens. Do I agree? I don't agree with none of this crap. I don't agree that Congress should be making laws for American Indians point blank, period. But I have to put the caveat, like I have had to keep doing, that these are not American Indians we're dealing with. These are foreigners, so they're being dominated by foreigners. And maybe the idea is to make an example for the real Indians to feel discouraged. Maybe that's what the whole point is, because it all seems so pointless. Why or why not? Do I agree? Well, I think I answered why I don't agree. Because this is all conquest, it's all doctrine of discovery. Therefore, it'll never be fair to true American Indians whatsoever. And the most they can hope for is the fastest exodus of most foreigners back to their homeland, where they can do anything they want that they shouldn't be doing here. In your opinion, what are the three most important events in the history of American Indian people's sovereignty in the United States? Use evidence from the article to explain your answer. Hmm. The most important events is the drafting of Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, because that is the only possible way for an Indian to begin to move away from being dominated in commerce. So that's one. Another important event in history. Oh boy. In American Indian history. Well, that's Native American history. So one of the most important events was the misclassification for the real American. It's important, although not positive. It is important because it shows what happened to real American Indians. Like I said, if the federal government created you, you're already created and owned and operated by the federal government. But the federal government didn't actually create Indians because Columbus did that. So the federal government is sort of just following up on it, but they technically didn't create it. It was already a word in the world lexicon, I guess they call it. So all this federal system did was continue a misnomer, but it didn't literally create the term Indian. It was already being applied to Americans. So another important event was the misclassification of American Indians into black, Negro, colored. So that's two things I think I have. Uh, third most important. The awakening. The awakening is a miraculous event. So that is the third most important. The misclassification is second. The mass miraculous awakening is the third. I forgot what the first one was. Let's see. Because it's that time of the morning, I guess. Um, for a timeline of major legislation discussed in this article, go to yeah, this is not going to allow me to go there. It's a PDF, I guess. Oh, so they have little activities. Okay. Small groups of no more than five. Half of each group will rise reality. And the other half will be the monominies preamble. Answer the following question for your reading discussing them with your half of the group. When ready, take turns sharing your findings with the rest of the group. Okay, I guess they have little games. But anyway, we did make it through this article miraculously. So why don't we read about the Constitutional Rights Foundation? The Constitutional Rights Foundation is a nonprofit, nonpartisan educational organization committed to helping our nation's young people to become active citizens and to understand the rule of law, the legal process, and their constitution heritage. Established in 1962, and this organization is older than me, CRF, what's the name of it? Constitutional Rights Foundation is guided by a dedicated board of directors drawn from the world of law, business, government, education, and the media. Expanding horizons, internships, civic action project, cops and kids, teacher, professional development and publications and curriculum, materials. Learn more at www.crf-usa.org. Okay. So there's more credits, and I think we will call it a night here. I'm getting a little tired. But once again, we were reading the winter 2021 issue of Bill of Rights in Action. The title of this article was American Indian Sovereignty. I thank you for watching. Until next time, I bid you peace and goodwill. Thank you so much again.